Welcome all to this session on inner transformations. My name is Nick Graham. I'm with the Transformations community, and I'm also the co-founder of the Weaving Lab. And the Weaving Lab is a community of system change practitioners with the North Star of universal well-being. So well-being of self, society, and planet. And that's really what brought me here to the Transformations community about 2 years ago. So I'd welcome you all to type in chat, what brought you here, where you at, and why you're here in this session. So let's all exercise our fingers, and we've got a really beautiful cast here, including you, but the speakers, the panelists, we will be going into various elements of inner transformations, frameworks, wisdom traditions, and more. But I'll let the panelists introduce themselves in a second. We've got slides. Next slide, please. Yeah, so after the panel inspiration nudges, and we'll go into breakouts. So we want to hear from the collective wisdom in this room, and then we'll come back to the panel. Next slide, please. Yeah, these housekeeping rules you've probably seen before. Translations are very useful. And the last one, yeah, please do enjoy this space. Next slide, please. And again, you've seen this before probably, so we welcome your thoughts on what are you hearing that's inspiring, and what potential collaborations are emerging. That one, I definitely want to plant that seed. Next slide, please. So what specifically are we talking about within transformations in the transformations community? So how do we embody the new systems? This is really the key for me. You know, we can talk the talk, but it's really about this embodiment and learning together to do that. And so learning together how to cultivate good partners and good partnership. And then what's the impact of well-being on the individual, and how does that relate to the wider system? And a crucial one, how do we decolonize our own thinking? We've had a few sessions today around decolonial practices. So with that, I think we want to jump into the next slide, and because I think we've talked to this one already. So yeah, let's go straight into the panel presentations, and starting with Paul and Teresa. So yeah, over to you.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Let's see if I can get the screen sharing going here again. Yes. Okay, so yes, me and Therese here, we are conducting some research onto transformative processes, and especially what can the benefits be of techniques and understandings from contemplative traditions in the situation we are facing. So I want to start with something that I know you're all familiar with, and it's this man. If we cannot solve a problem with the same level of thinking that created it in the first place, then I think the question begs to be asked, how do we reach new levels of thinking? And a deeper part of that question could be, what can be done to facilitate a massive shift in consciousness? So how did we end up in this state of affairs that we are currently experiencing? I've seen this question, or I've seen this interpretation come from various sources, from spiritual leaders to researchers. I think it's really clear and beautiful that at the root of much of our challenges today lies the sense of separation. And with the sense of separation, we have the disconnection, the loneliness, the anxiety, and despair. And the sense of separation is that idea, or that very strong belief that I'm walking around here in this world made of matter, looking out at it with my individual consciousness. And that's an individual consciousness that is a product of my brain. And this worldview, or this sense of separation, is shown in several different ways. On an individual level, that corresponds to mental health problems. And on an interpersonal level, that's conflict and competition. But on a wider global level, this is what enables or facilitates the destruction and degradation of our planet and all its habitats. So if we take that approach as our starting point, what we are looking into in this research project is how can a shift in understanding relate to our work with transforming society. So we are working out of what we call the awareness model. And if the sense of separation is on one side, what would be the opposite? Yeah, that would probably be one of the many names and stories of transcendence. We can talk about it in the sense of wholeness, unity, the unified field, God, Allah, the Great Spirit, Mother. There's been many names to try to describe this perspective of unity. And what we tried to do in our research project is to examine this sense of separation, the validity and the truth of it. And we do that firstly by what we call the inward-facing path. So in this model, you find a number of different levels. You have the physical experience, the mental experience, the emotional experience. You have the social interactions, and then you have the global context in which this all take place. But in order to gain some insight or wisdom, what many traditions are pointing us to is to examine. And the root question of this is, who or what am I really? Another way to formulate that question is, what is essential to me and what does never leave me? And referring back to the model, what is it that knows my experience of the tactile sensations, of the mental activity, of the feelings and emotions, of the social interactions? So the inward-facing path eventually brings us to what can be called being aware of being aware, or being, or a state of being. And how is this relevant to the transformation situation? Well, once we find our way down through these layers and we get to peek in through the center of our being, or through the center of this model, we perceive the world in a slightly different way. And once we've come to this point, we can start the outward-facing path. So the inward-facing path eventually brings us to the realization that I am not a thing. I am that which knows my experience. And then the work comes how to live in line with this understanding. And that's where the transformations work starts. How can we be informed by states of transcendence, or have a deeper understanding of what it is to be a human in the world today? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I feel like there's a lot of depth in here that we want to explore, and yeah, I'm struck by the inner and outer, the relationship between the world happening out there and actually happening in our neurons, and then actually the interconnectedness of those neurons with all of yours and sprinklings of stardust. But I just want to move swiftly on to the next presenter. So Kira, can you take us to your garden, please?
Thank you. And speaking of swiftly, there's two very hyperactive cardinals. So if you see any birds flying at my head, don't mind the ducking in advance. Yeah, thank you, Paul. That's a beautiful introduction and a wonderful segue into the work that I'm doing right now. My work emerged kind of in response to the growing interest in using inner transformations to accelerate sustainability progress. And despite the huge proliferation of offerings, there's currently no evaluative process to see how much inner transformation is aligned with outer sustainability. So I designed an assessment framework to evaluate how and to what extent different interventions address both the inner and the outer dimensions of sustainability. And I use the IDGs, the inner development goals, to set the inner parameters and a requirements-based sustainability assessment framework for the outer. So balancing IDGs and SDGs essentially. And what I did was evaluate a huge selection of different online mindfulness-based programs that took place at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I really wanted to see how much was mindfulness addressing core requirements for inner and outer sustainability during a global health emergency. So I found some synergies. For example, these events were really helpful for increasing present moment awareness, for identifying some of the challenges that we're facing, for bringing awareness to suffering, for example. They're also really beneficial for increasing compassion and empathy, for helping with self-care and personal well-being. Another thing that I hadn't expected that I thought was really exciting was to see that these practices for mindfulness were helpful for building stamina, especially in trust building. And this was really important in vulnerable communities. And it was also really useful for building complexity tolerance, which we know is absolutely crucial for dealing with increasing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, or VUCA, with this polycrisis that we're experiencing. However, there are a lot of trade-offs, and I haven't seen these mentioned as much in the literature, and I just wanted to spotlight some of them. And what I noticed in these events were that they were very self-focused and very human-centric. There was very little focus on extending kind of beyond commitment and engagement. So it was just awareness only, but taking the practices off the mat and into the world were just not really on the radar in a lot of these events. I also saw that the events were concealing and strengthening some unsustainable systems, and this is really dangerous, especially given the times that we're facing. There also seemed to be this assumed positive and organic cascading benefit. So for example, an individual that would practice or engage in different forms of inner transformation would somehow result in some automatic benefit for collective well-being. There just wasn't really any evidence to substantiate that. And insofar as assuming this organic cascading effect, these tended to really overlook the causal structures that influence and bind transformations in general. And one of the other things that I saw creeping up was that it was assumed that these interventions, in this case was mindfulness, was universally beneficial for everyone. And this really lacked the nuance and the context specificity that perhaps these interventions aren't suitable for everyone everywhere. So a few reflections on the work. Interventions for inner transformation are not automatically supportive or detrimental to sustainability progress. And this really requires that we take a more contextual approach. For example, different events, speakers, different sessions, different practices all have different things to offer, but we can't just assume that they're the same in every context, because they really vary quite largely. If you are looking to build an online intervention, I would also just offer the advice that it's very unlikely that people attend all sessions. So if you have a session that's focused only on cultivating well-being for the individual and completely overlooks any benefit for for the collective, then that's not really in service of sustainability and the kinds of progress that we need. And I saw that this was happening quite a bit. There's a lot of danger in discouraging action and telling people just look after yourself and assuming there would be this natural cascade. And this happened quite a bit in many different events and all different contexts. Another thing that I think is really worth highlighting is that resilience can actually be undermined by inner transformation and mindfulness. And we see this with healthcare workers, for example, who are experiencing unprecedented rates of moral injury and burnout. And they're really pushing back on mindfulness, yoga, inner transformation, and saying, we don't need any more meditative practices. We are extremely mindful. We don't need anything else to help us build resilient. We are resilient, but what we need is a sustainable, equitable, and just work environment. So absolutely, we need more practices for compassion and empathy and healing, but we really need to make sure that they are in service and aligned with broader sustainability criteria. And we definitely need sociomotive support, especially for students and teachers and researchers who are working in the sustainability space, especially climate communicators, for example, who are suffering from both direct and vicarious forms of trauma because of their work. And I think it's really important that as these interventions become more popular, we really need to recontextualize them and bring greater attention to broad inner and outer sustainability requirements. And building off this work, what we're currently doing at the Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience is we're looking at how can we assess the readiness of organizations who want to bring inner transformation into their companies. So essentially, what are the kinds of capacities, skills that are needed for the readying process? So this prelude to change for transformation. And this includes practices of learning and unlearning. And how do we really build and nurture the kinds of conditions so that we reduce opportunities for insidious challenges to emerge when we force transformations? So for context, how do we make sure that we're not perpetuating coloniality and polarization with equity, diversity, and inclusivity programs? How do we make sure we're not reinforcing burnout when we're trying to encourage wellness and resilience? And how are we not strengthening unsustainable systems when trying to increase the resilience of social and ecological systems? So really, how can we approach this with more compassion, more humility, hyper self-reflexivity, and precaution? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, I think I'm back on. Thank you so much, Kira. Yeah, I'm really curious to explore the nuances of your work. And so if it's public already, if it's published, then please do drop a link in the chat. And same for everyone in the crowd as well who's got relevant content. I think this is going to be gratefully received by everyone. Yeah, so the contextual nuance, it's definitely not one size fits all. And yeah, really interesting. Sometimes it's a little counterintuitive, but in service to, if we are in service to ourselves, can we also be in service to life? So moving swiftly on to Anne, and we're going to hear a bit about collective sense-making and community health.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick and Paul and Therese and Kira. I want to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing with students. And I'm at a phase in my career where I am reflecting on what is and is not being addressed in the sustainable development and community planning literature. I've come to a point in doing a fair amount of teaching at an R2 access-based institution and building degree programs and pedagogies for working directly with communities, and also been working in the global sustainability space. And frankly, also, I'll just be really forthright in saying, going through my own personal processes with the pandemic and the process of being alive and moving in the world, and reflecting on what has given rise to and sustained the kind of transformative wellness that has enabled what I think shows other people being at their best, and where I've experienced myself, I think, being closer to my best perhaps than at other times. And I'm really taken with the literature that's being developed in psychology around collective efficacy. In general, I would say that the work that I'm doing is founded most specifically on methodological concerns around how do we think about the unit of analysis in terms of transformative wellness and healing and sustainability? And what do we inherit from paradigms and discourses and ways of making sense in the world that might blind us to the dynamics and the phenomena that are potentially the most important or could be more important than we realize? I say that because even the very discourse of transformative wellness owes much to psychology, and psychology, not unlike market economics, is overly focused on the individual and really treats and valorizes the individual as the end all be all of all beingness and kind of interaction in the world. And while that's really powerful, I would say it's also extremely male and extremely technical and extremely kind of blindered in terms of our experience of each other and of the world. And so the movements that I see in the psychology literature that are moving from ideas of individual efficacy and the ways of kind of cultivating and enacting a locus of control within oneself that are making room for the more contextualized and social ecological experiences of selfhood, including the collective self, are to me very generative and very provocative, and I think hold a lot of wisdom potentially for how we might salvage our own well-being and our ability to be with one another. Again, going back to my own experience, partially because I don't really have much else to move from in a truly inductive sense. When I think about points of vulnerability in my own life and ages and stages of relative sustainability, the things that seem to me to have provided some measure of glue and connectedness to other people and the basis from which I was able to form trusting and solid relationships was counterintuitively through less professional forms of interaction and play. And I'm thinking about sport, I'm thinking about religion, I'm thinking about performing arts, and ways that people interact with one another where the stakes are perhaps deliberately lowered and provide us with ways to build relationships that are very context specific and that retain the ability to play and to stay light, and thus the title of my talk and the way that I'm framing my work currently. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now simply to focus on one slide in particular. I'm appreciating that this is not a typical conference. And so I just want to move to one slide on the playing together, staying together, and the recursive nature of transformative wellness and the ideas that I'm really trying to focus on at the moment, which echo and draw in some of the things that I heard Kira reflecting on in her work, which is that it is really difficult, I would say, if not impossible, for individuals to achieve peace and well-being in isolation. And that in addition to this being a nuanced and very contextualized challenge where people need different things at different times, we are in fact social ecological beings. And so that is part of why I'm thinking about collective efficacy and the ways in which that can potentially be developed. I've been working with community dance groups here in Tacoma, also thinking about children's sport and whether it's soccer, swimming, rowing, different ways that people come together. There's also a very extensive literature in dealing with trauma that shows that one of the only ways that people who are coping with trauma, and there's a lot of empirical evidence that says that this is the true epidemic of our age, is the amount of trauma that people are trying to cope with, is through endeavors that enable them to park their trauma and rebuild trust and selfhood in collaboration with other people, where they don't have to delve directly into their traumatizing experiences and relive it and reinscribe it in an individualized therapeutic interaction. So that the transformative healing and individual wellness that we all want so badly actually counterintuitively requires a shared and purposive community endeavor to give it life and to breathe that kind of spark of lightness and well-being back into it. So the third point really is that the way in, and this is perhaps good news since these are heavy and difficult things to be thinking about when we think about our own future and the future of the globe hanging in the balance, but that the way in is in fact through joy and lightness and the engagement of our body and our spirit and our mind through discipline patterns of play. And that if we are able to recognize that overly kind of heavy-handed, individualized approaches are not working, the alternative is not to throw our hands up in the air and say, okay, all is lost and all is mush, but in fact to work to generalize and operationalize the outcomes that we do want to organize ourselves for, and to try to be able to recognize the units of analysis and the ways in that might at once make us both more joyful and happy, and help to heal and transform our inner as well as our collective beings. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Oh, beautifully timed, but even better content. So thank you again. I think we're just touching the surface of this. So if you would like to share more in the chat, links, etc., then yeah, please do. And so there was a great point around the power of play. So let's now play together, and we'll go into breakouts, and would love for you to chat around what's coming up for you in this conversation. Is there a burning question that we should address collectively or in your breakout groups? And what could we do together? So we've heard, Susie, you got your hand up. Yeah, good to have clarifying questions. Susie? Can't hear you. Susie, if you could maybe send me a message or you've got a comment. Is the notion of discipline patterns of joy not oxymoronic? Would love for you to speak more to what that means. Indeed, yes. So that's a great question, Susie. Was that your question? Still can't hear you. Let's save those questions for when we come back from breakouts. That is a beautiful question. So my suggestion was to stay in the whole group. Yeah, we've got groups of 4 for 15 minutes. We've got half an hour left. Let me just check the time. Put your hands up if you would like to. Okay, let's all go on screen. Can we come on screen? Can you put your videos on? Let's go on gallery view. Go on gallery view if you want to go. And let's put hands up for breakouts. Let's stay in plenary. Yeah. Okay, let's stay in plenary. Good suggestion, Susie. We are going to improvise. And so, yeah, do we want to start with your question, Susie? You want to come to the microphone? Susie's definitely not shy, but sometimes has tech difficulties. So yeah, why don't we start with that question? Yeah, Susie's coming back. So we'll get into yeah, what comes up for you? Because we'll save that Susie's question for when Susie's back. Yeah, what comes up for you? What's the burning question that you want to ask?
May I?
Please.
Okay, ciao.
Ciao.
I'm Julia from Barcelona now, especially like exactly in Barcelona, in the city. So my question is related to the time frame. So of course, those paths take time to happen, and sometimes people don't realize they will need time to experience some effects. And my question is about what's the panelist experience on short moments of transformative learning through well-being, through an enhanced well-being, let's say, that maybe could be seeds for starting a path. So what could be the unmissable ingredient for those short experience to be like the spark, then to start maybe a longer journey.
Was there a particular panelist that you had in mind for that, or?
Well, maybe Kira is the one that seems closer to a practical recipe for that. I mean, I resonate a lot with the dubs that she exposed.
Thank you for your question. I think there's a difference between sparking a light and a transformation. For me, they're a little different. I think we want a lot of these interventions to help spark that light, and then we can't assume that they're going to lead to an overnight transformation. I think that's the danger if we're approaching practices like mindfulness, and especially as it's become more decontextualized in North America, and you have a very rich practice, and Paul could speak to this, I'm sure. But when you have a very rich practice and you're breaking it down very quickly into these little bite-sized units of engagement, as I saw in these events, where you take something that takes years to cultivate these capacities and you break it down into a 1-minute fix, you really you lose the potential for a big transformation. Can it catalyze and bring awareness to things? Absolutely. But is it going to lead to a profound shift? I don't think so. That takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. So for sustainability, a lot of my concern is we're bringing in these interventions as quick fix solutions to these long-term big challenges. So what we're doing is we're pushing transitions, but not full transformations, or we're encouraging nudges, and all of these are useful, but without that long-term sustainable vision, I don't think they're going to lead to the transformations that we need.
May I follow up on that as well? Because I think one of the things that one is hard pressed to express in 5 minutes around the collective efficacy and the kind of playfulness and the significance of it goes to just that question around a transformative, a structural shift. And Kira, I really appreciated you making that distinction between the kind of moment of inspiration and maybe a shift in disposition that can indeed be very individual. But unless one is engaged with other people who have a similar sense of the quote unquote rules of the game, and I say the rules of the game in that deliberate, very informal sense, the kind of whether it's like a Bourdieu or like a practice theory idea of like, when you're dancing with somebody, there's certain steps that people take, and there's such a joy that can enact a transformative change. Or when you're playing a soccer game, and there's an understanding between two people of like, oh, we're going to play the game this way, that might in fact be the seed of a real transformative structural shift, that it in fact requires other people to be in a similar set of understandings, normative understandings about like, oh, this is how this is done. And so if I or somebody experiences that kind of spark of momentary inspiration, that we have someplace to put it, that we're not then kind of just spinning and left to kind of watch that light kind of wither and die away, but that we can kind of share it with other people in a meaningful way.
Yeah, beautiful. And also the invitation for burning questions is for the panelists as well. So I know you have questions for each other. And I would like to come back to you and in a moment. I was curious to maybe go a little bit deeper into Paul's and Teresa's the wisdom traditions, because I think we didn't really get into much there. So I wondered if there was something you wanted to add, because I think we're using a lot of male perspectives and Western perspectives and modern perspectives. And so I'm curious if you have anything to add. You're on mute.
Yes. Referring to the question that was posed recently here, the experiences that could help us to embark on a transformative journey. One perspective on this could be coming back to the sense of separation and to the varieties of self-transcendent experience that we humans can have. There's a beautiful paper called exactly that, the varieties of self-transcendent experience, for if anyone wants to take a look at that. But I'd say for something to be really making us want to dive deep into a transformative process, it would be something that in some manner changed our outlook on either ourselves or on the world, or on both, preferably. And my experience of teaching meditation is that these times that we are living in, it seems like the veil is getting thinner and thinner, and more people in retreats or in courses are having experiences that were usually reserved for very long-term practitioners. And we can also draw some parallels to the research in psychedelics in this, how one short experience of an altered state of consciousness can really change our way of looking at the world and being in the world, and give us purpose and engagement to really embark on some important work. So how we look upon ourselves and how we look upon the world, if the experiences we have can sort of tap into and shift something in there, I think there's a huge potential for fueling the transformation of society.
Yeah, indeed. The indigenous medical, well, let's say plant medicine has also come up in the chat from Susie. And yeah, it's one of my favorite theories around the missing link as well. Don't know if you saw that Netflix show. And I wanted to just give Teresa an opportunity to add to, yeah, what's coming up for you, and yeah, what can we do together?
Thank you so much. Thank you also for raising the question. It really, there is something to the scale. There's a scaling here, isn't it? Both perhaps mainly in terms of time scale, and it relates to a session that I just spent on this morning here in Prague on how we can evaluate and assess transformative change, starting of course with the question, what is transformative change in relation to change? So it also a matter of what we mean when we say transformative change. I think that applies to when also studying individuals, that we need to apply these questions here as well. And as for my point of view, I think that this is one of the main questions that I think will be empirically studied for the coming 5 years, perhaps. I think we will have a lot of publications on this, because there is this assumption that transformation takes time, and perhaps it does in some sentences, and perhaps sometimes it doesn't. We don't really know that yet, because we don't have that much empirical studies, in particularly in the field of inner transformations, if that is a field. But I think that there's a lot of work to be done here, and a lot of discussions and reflective discussions on what do we mean when we say transformative change, individual transformative change, and how, of course, how can we, as you already have mentioned, when is there something that is sparking a change? When does then the change occur? And this that kind of some hinted in the session earlier this morning that this is irreversible, but that was contrasted by some other that said, well, is that really so? So I think that this is truly an ongoing conversation that we will see a lot of more in the coming years as well, I think. And it's interesting. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and you hinted at the need for, well, we've all talked about the need for lots more research in this, and I wanted to mention the Inner Development Goals are partners of this conference, and so I know that they need lots more of your expertise, wisdom, experience. So let us know if we can bridge anything there, or feel free to just reach out to them. I know they're very open to collaboration. Yeah, and feel free to drop in any invites if there's research that you want support with. Yeah, we're here to do exactly that. Inky, you had a question in chat. I see the chat is quite active, not fully up to speed. I wondered if you could speak to that and maybe bring that into this this room.
Yes, I think one of the things that comes up for me is that we're moving towards a system where we're beyond self, but the physical spaces are still following a monetary devised economic kind of thing. So I'm curious about how we are cultivating spaces for this play that Anne refers to, or the meditation, etc. I mean, these things, it's interesting to even have a thread in this conference on the inner work or the inner journey, because in fact in so many places it's not even a part of the conference. But I'm taking it further, is that it's almost like I see interesting models of people co-creating community and spaces where this play, this intuition or wisdom traditions, etc., can have a non-extractive space. So I'm just curious to see how this emerges, and I'm wondering who's seeing interesting cultivations of physical space where the stuff that's beyond the self, or the inner journey that's not just for self, is playing out. I'm curious about what people are experiencing.
Yeah, great question. Does anyone have examples of something that's working or something that's tried and failed? Equally valuable.
I see that Julia's mentioned in the chat a community in Barcelona, but I'm also curious about more. I think there's so much happening in the chat that we need to dig into also.
Yeah, let's take a moment. So
I'm not able to access the chat, and I'm so sorry to interject, but I wonder if I'll just ask for a technical help with that. Thank you.
I don't see the chat either.
Oh, the chat is in Hoover. It's not in Zoom. It's in, yeah, that's the technical support. There you go. Yeah, so Susie's recommending the work of Bill Plotkin, Soulcraft, and asking, what do we mean about working? Well, so also we asked the question, what is transformations? And one definition, you'll probably hear several this week, but yeah, transformations simply being new ways of thinking, being, and doing, and new value systems. And then what might be a working space, a physical space, where we're able to integrate inner transformation with collective and with beyond our species as well. So I'm not particularly familiar with eco-villages, Transitions Network is another a group that have physical spaces. And then at a smaller level, there's the yoga houses, and but again, that's been perhaps there's a bit of appropriation there, but that's an interesting question. Yeah, what kind of spaces do you find valuable for you in your inner transformation, and how does that relate to the community around you?
So I'm interested in a number of spaces, but some people are doing a thing called Life Schoolhouse in Canada, which is a rethinking of a learning community, which is transformative, community-based, emergent, it's all of the things that school kind of isn't, which I think is a real rethinking and coming back to tapping into the knowledge of the community for a learning space. So that's interesting. And I'm also finding, ironically, with all of the information that's around, I'm kind of seeking curated spaces. So I'm imagining libraries or places where experiences can be managed. And I know this was part of the decolonial discussion today as well, living libraries, because for me, it's finding spaces where I can find something that will contradict what I'm doing, but also finding not just the new places to be, think, and do, but maybe what's been done elsewhere, or what's been done in the past, or what other practices are coming back in. Because we also have this idea that it's new, but many times it's not new. We're going around the same circle again.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll send a link. Julia's asked for a link to the Life Schoolhouse example, which is really nice. I will send that in the chat and also to others as well. And I'm really keen on having a look at what Bill Plotkin says about soulcraft. But I think sometimes these are isolated. So I'm looking at that people go with their traditions or with their kind of lineage or what they get. And I'm looking really for spaces where we could mix up, without appropriating, but mix up what we have as a way of doing it or a space of doing it with what others are doing.
Yeah, rubbing shoulders together. That's how we learn together. And I just moved to London, and I'm looking for regenerative communities around here, and they're really hard to find. So I guess I'm going to have to start one. So I would love any recipes to adapt. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Just wanted to check in on the chat again. So a burning question. We do have a burning question. We are so focused on practices that help transcendence, but Thomas Berry called for incendence, or is that incident? No, incendence, not stepping away or going beyond, but diving into our depths. It is the difference between maybe a focus on spirit versus soul. How do the panelists and the audience think about this? And we've also got Kira with her hand up.
Yeah, I love that question. I'm really happy to speak to it because it's very much aligned with the work we're doing now. So I think a lot of the interventions that we're seeing are based on that transcendence model of there's so many bad things going on right now. How do we transcend them? How do we get past them? And some of the work that we're doing is like, how do we do the inner work, the ugly work, the challenging work, so that we can dive in, and that's the place of the soul that's that Bill Plotkin talks about, and it's very uncomfortable and very challenging. And how can we kind of work towards more of that collective capacity than just looking at a salvation or some kind of approach to get ourselves out of it. So I think it's really this need to accept that there's a lot of work to be done on the individual before just chasing some kind of transformation. So I think that's kind of where the yoga, the meditation, the psychedelics, they almost have been commodified and appropriated and stolen out of these rich soteriological frameworks that are embedded, in which they're embedded. And we've kind of torn down the richness. And in so doing, we're just chasing this salvation, or we're using it as a bomb for like the eschatology of the climate doom, instead of actually going deep and doing that work at the center of the earth, and spending time in those really challenging places. And so that's a lot of what we're doing now, is how do we build the capacity to sit with the discomforts as we hospice modernity, as we hospice these systems that are failing, and how do we let them die and support them to die with grace, and build these different ways of being and doing that are not just transcending, but are going in and deep. And spending time with the ugly, the broken, the painful, the woundedness, and seeing what emerges there.
Wow. Yeah, well said. Yeah, indeed. And I wanted to make sure that other voices, the other people in the room, have had a chance to bring their questions to the table. So Sabrina, Jill, Alyssa, Lindsay, Clara. Otherwise, I might invite final closing thoughts from our panelists. And yeah, I think we're drawing to a close. Is there anything in the chat that we haven't addressed yet? Well, probably lots, but just trying to pick one out. Yeah, I think if you're able to check in on the chat, it will be there for the duration, I think probably for a couple of months afterwards as well, which is also why I really encourage sharing of those links right now. So yeah, yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I was thinking of some input into this question of transcendence and the worldview. I think we're one of the problems for many of the people who have some sort of an awakening experience or have some sort of a shift in consciousness is that our current description of the world, the reductionist, materialistic, individualistic worldview, it makes it very difficult to integrate that type of experiences, because we're locked in a worldview, or we can call it we're locked in a worldview that comes from the systems we've created. And part of my work is training future psychiatrists in how to be with the patients in risk of suicide. And I find it very, very dangerous and very difficult when we have, on the one hand, some sort of a rise in consciousness where more and more people are having deeper experiences. And then we have a healthcare system that pathologizes those types of experiences. So the question on how we look on ourselves, whether the hard problem of consciousness, whether the brain produces consciousness or not, that worldview, I would like to see more a widening of the research approach to include other venues of research than what we're seeing now. Yeah, that's probably the strongest need I can see now.
Yeah, that's a great way to bring us to a close with what is the strong need that you sense. Maybe if there's anyone else that's got a 30-second input to that, but absolutely we need to widen our scope, widen our lenses. And otherwise, I would just invite us to just be together. I'm painfully aware that this conference is quite so I've got another session to moderate in 5 minutes, which is around just transformations. So welcome you to that. And maybe let's just have a closing minute or so of appreciative gaze. So I'd love to see all of those videos, and if you want to put on the gallery view and just take a moment, take a few breaths together. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience, and thank you for that moment as well. Yeah, I really appreciated that personally, and look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Have a great conference and a great day. And yeah, let's keep doing this together. Much love.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
for the finishing silence.
Grazie.